you write in the book about the popular view in the West that religion is declining, that secularisation is inevitable, and that it seems to be a very parochial view of things. I mean, thinking about somewhere like West Africa, where Grace lives, the opposite is true, right? There really is no sign of religious decline. There is maybe signs of religion shifting. You talk about the corporatization of religion, the marginalization of folk religions. So we can understand this in economic terms, right? Hence your theme. What do you think people are missing when they assume that secularization is an inevitable process?
Well, let's answer that in two parts. The first thing is, what do the current data show? And the current data clearly do show a decline in most measures of religiosity in significant parts of Western Europe and North America. And there are some good reasons for that, which I spend a lot of time discussing in the book. But then there are many other countries to show the opposite. And in fact, I have some plots at the back of the book in which, I show on a horizontal axis of a graph, I show what the measures of religiosity were about 20, 30 years ago. And then I show on the vertical axis what they are today. So if you draw a 45-degree line, countries below the 45-degree line have seen declines, and countries above the 45-degree line have seen increases. And the amazing take-home message from all of those graphs is that essentially, on average, nothing happens. That's to say, there are points all over the place, above and below the line, but there are as many points above the line as below the line. And basically, there are lots of places where it's increasing, there are lots of places where it's falling, but in the world as a whole, there's no obvious decline or increase. Now, how does that fit with the story that many of us have absorbed about secularization? We go back to Max Weber, we go back to Durkheim, we go back to Marx, we go back to all of these people who say, well, there's an incompatibility between religion and, let's say, science broadly, or modernity, or whatever it might be. And I think the main thing that story misses, and it's much clearer now than it was then, although I would say in defense of all of those thinkers that they had a more subtle view of the process than is commonly attributed to them now. But the thing that was not apparent to them then was that religion was not a timeless, unchanging phenomenon. It was a dynamic economic phenomenon driven by the innovative decisions of entrepreneurs. And so, of course, if religious offerings had remained unchanged for the last century and a half, we could have expected to see a massive decline. But they haven't remained unchanged for the last century and a half. They've adapted, they've responded, they've come back with a new version of religion that is much better adapted to the particular societies in which they find themselves. And there are some places where that doesn't work. And I've suggested that North America in the early 21st century is one of them, and we can talk about why that's so. But across the world as a whole, basically religions shifted shape. It's been subject to huge amounts of innovation. And, as always in turbulent times, some of those innovations fail, some of those innovations succeed, but globally, we're seeing no overall tendency to decline. I actually think that those early thinkers have in some ways been traduced, because even Weber, with his what's often talked about as the disenchantment of the world, isn't saying we live in this utterly arid, sort of unspiritual modern world anymore, and there's nothing that religion can do for us. What he's saying is that the vibrant, rather transactional world of pre-modern religion, in which we had, spirits around doing everything for us. I mean, I couldn't go out the door without, saluting a spirit over my lintel. And then, if I wanted, I give an example in the book of, repairing a boat among the Tikopians. And, in order to repair a boat, you have to get the eel god to leave the boat so that the god who resides in the tool that you bring in to repair it can come in. And, in earlier times, you were just kind of surrounded by spirits with whom you were transacting in order to get through life. And Weber completely accurately said, the world's not like that anymore. But I don't think even Weber was thinking that, it was replaced by complete silence. I mean, Weber himself said, I am religiously unmusical. He did not say religious music doesn't exist. He just said, I'm not very good at hearing it.
This apparent consistency in the amount of secularism worldwide, is it possible that it's to do with differential fertility rates across countries? So you have, yes, Europeans have become, and North Americans have become markedly more secular. They now also make up a smaller proportion of the world in terms of population size. And then you've seen population booms in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where people are more religious. Is that maybe what's going on? That it's more that more religious places are becoming more populous?
Well, that's definitely part of the story. But, and indeed, I spend quite a lot of time saying that explains the fact that the aggregate proportions of people who declare themselves on census forms to be Christians have declined substantially in the last century or more, without it being true that Christianity is declining everywhere. It's rather that Christianity was concentrated in the year 1900 in parts of the world that were destined to grow demographically very slowly over the next century. And so once you kind of adjust for that, you see that actually Christianity is in just as good shape as Islam in terms of gaining adherents. There's, I think, there's a second point behind your question, if I've understood it correctly, which is that maybe overall religiosity seems to be going up because of these demographic factors. Now, in the comparison I just gave you, that's not what's going on, because in the comparison I gave you about overall levels of religiosity, I talked about those figures where there's sort of points above the 45-degree line and points below. That's not what's happening, because every country is weighted one observation regardless of its population, and therefore its population growth doesn't make a difference. What's, I think, interesting is that demographic change is shifting the things that people care about. And in particular, we're seeing in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa a demand for religion that has to do with the challenges of families in a society that's changed so much that you can no longer rely on the traditional sources of support. So that, people are moving from, say, village areas where they might have had their parents around to help them look after their children. They move somewhere in the city. They're already making that transition. I mean, we're seeing astonishing changes. India now has fertility below replacement. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. And so masses of people are moving into the cities, and they need some help with that. And they are massively starting to privilege the quality of their children over the quantity of their children. And what better way to assure the quality of your children than to join a community that will help you rear them? So I think the answer to your question is yes, but it's not as though, so to speak, there's no real increase in religiosity. It's just an artifact of the data. That's not what's going on. But I think the demographic transition is having a very big impact on the kinds of demand that people are making of their religious communities.